English and creative writing at Holmes University. I'm going to read from my book, Letters from Cairo, which is a sort of a family memoir based on 6 months that family spent in Egypt in 2002. I was born in Egypt and immigrated to the States in 1969 as a child. I was about 8 years old. And we went back and spent 6 months there. Our older daughter, Yasmin, was 8 years old at the time, and our younger daughter, Celine, was 5 years old. This passage comes towards the end of the book, as I am sort of finally struggling to find a sense of balance between my attachment to my homeland and to the place where I currently live, which was Rome. My first trip to Egypt as an adult in 1990 allowed me to reclaim a sense of who I was, to own the knowledge of my cultural identity, and to create a unified identity, rather than the fragmented one that had been thrust upon me by my American experience. This second trip allowed me to release the sense of loss that comes with the immigrant experience. Perhaps that's because I returned this time with my 2 daughters. I could no longer look in the direction of the past, but had to turn my gaze towards the future that my children will create. A few weeks ago, while having dinner at a friend's house, in the middle of appetizers and pleasant conversation, Yasmin tugged at my shoulder. With sadness painted across her face, she said, "I miss Egypt. I miss Aunt Elise. I miss my cousins. I miss eating molokhaya." There is nothing I can do. This sense of loss is now deeply embedded in her. Still, the next day I make molokhaya for dinner, and that helps to soothe her. It has been 2 years since we returned from Egypt, but sometimes Celine will begin to tell us a story about something that happened. Her story is in the present tense, but slowly we figure out she's talking about things that happened at stepping stones. We interrupt her, point out that this was in Egypt and in the past. Our observation is irrelevant to her, and she continues. Egypt and Virginia, stepping stones and community school, the past and the present. She collapses them and places them in front of her in a seamless pattern. From Yasmin, I have learned it is possible to create wholeness. Her poems weave together the various strands of physical appearance, geography, music, history, and food to express who we are. From Celine, I have learned that at some point, you must choose a place to claim as your home, a place to locate yourself, even as your shadow travels, even as loss fills your body, and even as nostalgia tugs at your memory. Our initial move to Roanoke had been a difficult one, both because we had grown so attached to upstate New York, where we had lived for the past 5 years, and built a community of friends, and also because it involved a move from north to south. As an immigrant, I tended to see America as a whole, with regional differences receding into the background. Our move to Roanoke brought those regional differences to the forefront. Even before we got here, my attempts to speak to people on the phone as we made plans for our move were filled with frustration. Somehow I could not get the information I needed, and I felt ill-equipped. Things did not improve much after our move. It seemed the only people I could get along with were other transplants from the north. I was a bit resentful. It had been hard enough to adjust to America, and now I was faced with another cultural adjustment. It was the little things that tripped me up, like the way people waved at each other as they drove, and the way it took so long to get anything done. When we returned from Egypt, something fell in place. It was as if my hands had been on the wrong piano keys. Finally, I figured out that all I had to do was move them over to get the right note. I puzzled over this. Why did it suddenly seem so easy, so natural? Slowly, I realized that perhaps the American South and Egypt were not so different from each other. If you saw someone you knew, it was not good enough to say a quick hi and keep on walking. You needed to stop and chat for a few minutes. If I wanted something, it was always better to go and ask in person, beginning with a genuine conversation before I made my request. Unlike the North, where I had learned that quick and to the point was the appropriate behavior, it seemed that here human interaction was more valued than efficiency and speed. Like Egypt, what you could accomplish was not simply based on your own abilities, but on your relationships with other people. I had separated America and Egypt so much in my mind, drawing a distinct cultural line, that I had missed the obvious signals in front of me when we arrived here. This was a culture that was not so unfamiliar. When we first settled here, the Blue Ridge Mountains that surrounded the valley of Roanoke felt gigantic and looming. They seemed to move, closing in on me. I had never paid much attention to landscape before, to how it can affect you or make you feel connected or disconnected to the place where you live. People in the United States move from one place to another so frequently, it never occurred to me that one could become connected to a particular physical environment. But in Roanoke, I began to hear people speak of the mountains with a sense of reverence and attachment. My first environment had been the water of the Mediterranean and the sand of the desert. They marked the boundaries of my childhood and helped me to understand my place in the world. When we left Egypt and returned to Roanoke, slowly I began to see the beauty of the mountains, the way they cradled the valley and the way their shape and color shifted with the seasons. Perhaps the mountains that surround Roanoke are not so different from the sea that embraces the coast of Alexandria or the desert that frames the city of Cairo. Thank you.